What happens when the CEO of a company steps into his own restaurant, disguised as an ordinary customer, to observe how his business is truly running? Let's dive in to see what unfolds. It was a quiet, overcast afternoon in the city of Lancaster, and Michael had just stepped into his restaurant, the Silver Spoon. But this wasn't any regular visit. Michael wasn't in his usual sharp suit, looking like the successful businessman that he was. No, today he was undercover, dressed as an average man, hoping to see his restaurant through the eyes of the people who worked there every day. Michael Dunn, the CEO of the Silver Spoon chain of restaurants, was a man known for his attention to detail. He'd built his empire from the ground up, and yet something had always felt off. The more successful the business became, the less connected he felt to it. He wanted to know what was happening behind the scenes. Were his employees happy? Were they being treated fairly? As he walked through the door, he could feel the warmth of the bustling atmosphere, the clink of dishes, the soft hum of chatter. This was the heart of his business. But as he glanced around, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were just a little off. A waiter, a young man named Tommy, approached him with a forced smile. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to the Silver Spoon. How can I help you today?" Tommy said, his voice trembling slightly, like he had a weight on his shoulders. Michael smiled back. "Just a table for one, please." Tommy nodded, leading him to a seat near the back of the restaurant. Michael sat down, scanning the room as he settled in. The employees moved about with hurried steps, eyes occasionally flickering toward the manager, who stood by the register with an almost looming presence. Michael couldn't help but notice how tense the staff seemed around him. As Tommy placed the menu in front of Michael, their hands brushed. Michael saw the brief flash of hesitation in Tommy's eyes. There was something wrong, something more than just the usual restaurant stress. But before he could ask, Tommy was already gone. Michael sat back in his chair, observing, quietly waiting for the right moment to get a closer look at what was really happening. It didn't take long. The first twist came when Michael noticed Tommy returning to the kitchen. His shoulders hunched, a hint of something unsaid in the way he carried himself. From his seat, Michael could see the manager, Greg, speaking to Tommy in a harsh tone. "Don't think I didn't see that," Greg was saying. "You'd better get your act together or you're out. And if you think you can keep the tips for yourself, think again. I'm taking a cut, you understand?" Michael's heart sank. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Tommy, just a young guy trying to make a living, was being threatened and mistreated over something as simple as a tip. It was then that Michael realized just how bad the situation was. The employees were afraid. They were working in a constant state of fear, afraid of losing their jobs over the smallest mistake, or even worse, over something they rightfully earned, like a tip. As Michael sat there, he thought about all the things he had heard over the years. Stories from other restaurant owners, whispers of unfair practices, but never did he imagine it was happening in his own company. He had to know more. Michael decided to take action, but he had to be subtle. He couldn't reveal his identity just yet. He needed to see the truth firsthand. As the meal continued, Michael watched as Tommy returned to serve him, his eyes downcast, his movements stiff. Michael decided to try something. "Here's $50 for your tip," Michael said, sliding the bill across the table with a smile. "You've done a great job today." Tommy's eyes flickered with a brief flash of gratitude, but then something strange happened. He didn't seem happy. He didn't smile or show the usual enthusiasm most waiters would when given such a generous tip. Instead, he hesitated, looking almost uncomfortable. I appreciate it, sir," Tommy mumbled, but his voice faltered. "But I have to give part of it to Greg. He takes a cut of every tip we get. That's just how it works around here." The words hit Michael like a slap in the face. He had known things weren't perfect, but this was unacceptable. The manager, Greg, was taking money from the workers, money they had rightfully earned. It was clear now that the system was rigged, and Tommy's misery was just one example of what was happening behind closed doors. Michael's heart clenched. How many others had been treated this way? How many people had been forced to live in fear, not knowing where their next paycheck was coming from or if they'd even get to keep their tips? But it didn't end there. That was just the first twist. There was more to this story. Later that evening, Michael decided to have a private conversation with Tommy. He motioned for him to sit down after his shift. "Tommy, I've seen a lot today, and I have to ask you, are things really as bad as they seem? Is Greg really taking your tips?" Tommy looked down at his hands, and for a long moment he didn't say anything. Finally, his voice broke. "It's not just Greg," Tommy whispered. "It's the whole system. Every night, the tips are pooled, and Greg takes a cut, no matter how much we earned. If we don't give him what he wants, we get written up or even fired. I've been working here for 2 years, and it's always been like this." The weight of Tommy's words hit Michael hard. He had built his company on the values of hard work, fairness, and respect for his employees. But here in this very restaurant, it was all being undone by one man's greed. Michael decided it was time for the second twist. He didn't want to expose himself just yet, but he knew he couldn't leave things as they were. The next day, Michael returned to the restaurant, this time as himself, the CEO. He walked straight to the back office, where Greg was sitting, confident and smug. He wasn't expecting Michael. "Greg," Michael said, his voice calm but firm, "I've seen everything, and I'm not happy. You've been taking tips from the employees, something that's completely unacceptable. You're fired." Greg's face paled. He stammered, "What? What are you talking about? You've been exploiting the workers, taking money they've earned, and running a system that's unfair. I'm done with you. Pack your things and leave," Michael said, his tone unwavering. Greg didn't argue. He knew he was caught. In the days that followed, Michael introduced a new system that would forever change the way the Silver Spoon operated. A system where tips went directly to employees, with no manager or middleman taking a cut. It was simple, automatic, and most importantly, fair. Tommy and every other employee finally felt like they had a voice. The weight of fear that had once hung over them was lifted, and they could work knowing that their hard-earned tips were truly their own. Michael looked at the restaurant now, seeing it in a new light. He had learned something invaluable that day, that no matter how big a company got, it would only succeed if its people were treated with respect. The system was flawed, but now it was fixed, and that was all that mattered. The Silver Spoon had been saved, not by a man in a suit, but by the heart of a man who truly cared. That's the story, friends. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a pleasure sharing it with you all. Don't forget to comment below and let me know where you're watching from. It's always fun to see the global reach of these stories. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button for more amazing stories, tips, and tricks. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. If you'd like to show some extra love, tap the 3 dots near the share button and send a super thanks.